Hello everyone, welcome to this new lecture in our program on American literature. My name is Fuzi Slisli. Today's topic is going to be on American Transcendentalism. This is a rich and powerful philosophical and poetic movement. I hope you will enjoy the discussion, and I hope it will trigger your curiosity to explore this subject more. So let's begin with a definition. What is Transcendentalism? Well, it comes from the verb to transcend, which means to go beyond the limits of something, to exceed, to be above and independent of the physical universe. When you transcend the physical universe, for example, if you manage to run to a point where you don't feel your body anymore, you just keep running, you feel like you've transcended your body. Transcendentalism, as a movement in poetry and literature, proposes a belief in a higher reality than that found in sense experience, or in a higher kind of knowledge than that achieved by human reason, right? So transcendentalists want to reflect a higher reality than that found in sense experience. What they say basically is that the reality we see through sense experience, through sight and touch and smell, and that reality, there is a reality beyond it, higher, right, and deeper. And in there, we can acquire a higher kind of knowledge than the knowledge we acquire through human reason. And this suggests that every individual is capable of discovering this higher truth on his or her own through intuition. Intuition. Not through reason, but through intuition, which in Arabic I think is called al-hadas. Hads. Most important transcendentalists include Ralph Waldo Emerson, Margaret Fuller, one of the very first American feminists, Henry David Thoreau, Bronson Alcott. The American transcendentalists began with the formation in 1836 of the Transcendental Club in Boston. They established a magazine called The Dial and had an office in Brook Farm, which is a farm owned by Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it became their location, their office in a way, and they experimented with communal living there, where people lived together, shared the living space, shared in making food, taking care of babies, and so on and so forth, in a way to counter the increasing individualism and isolation of the individual and their increasing industrialization that was happening in the 19th century. Because you have to remember, transcendentalism is happening at a time when industrialization was becoming very big in Western European and American societies. And to counter the heavy impact of industrialization, the isolation of the individual, the loneliness, this increasing belief in facts and reason, and the increasing neglect of human qualities, the imagination, the spirit, spirituality, kindness, things that are not measurable or quantifiable, do not exist for capitalism and industrialization. So these people felt that the humanness of human beings is being destroyed, and they wanted a return to nature and a return to a spiritual and human life, right? In our previous lectures, we talked about how Puritans saw that humans are born sinful. According to the Puritans, most human beings will go to hell. Most human beings are born sinners because of the sin of Adam and Eve. And we saw how Enlightenment thinkers and rationalists in the previous lecture believe that human beings are born as a blank slate, like an empty page. They're neither good nor evil. They are a white sheet. And it's their life and their actions in their life which will determine whether they are good or evil. Well, Transcendentalism go further than Enlightenment thinkers and believe that humans are inherently good. That when human beings are born, they are born inherently good, right? And life will either reinforce this goodness or will destroy it. There is a strong influence of Romanticism on Transcendentalism, and this influence can be seen in the celebration of individualism, in the celebration of the beauty of nature, and the virtue of humankind, that humankind has virtue. They're not just robots and machines that work certain amount of hours and build factories and, and buildings and bridges and, steel and fire. But that human beings are virtuous. They are born virtuous. And nature is beautiful, and there is a celebration of individualism. In all these elements, there is a strong influence of Romanticism in Transcendentalism. Transcendentalist beliefs include intuition. They believe in intuition, that intuition, not reason, is the highest human faculty. Transcendentalists reject materialism. They have a strong rejection of materialism. Materialism, money, things, goods, wealth, having big houses and all sorts of, they reject all that materialism. And they believe that simplicity is the path to spiritual goodness, to spiritual greatness. A person, the path that leads to spiritual greatness is simplicity, living a simple life. Nature, also they believe that nature is a source of truth and inspiration. So a person needs to be always close to nature and in tune with nature. They also believe in non-conformism or non-conformity, and individuality and self-reliance. And non-conformism, basically, it's the idea of not following everything that is done in your society, but to think for yourself and to choose your ideals and ideas and principles and values using your own reflection and your own intuition and your own arguments, rather than just following blindly whatever society you live in. So Transcendentalism rejects conformism and educate people to be non-conformists, to be individuals and to have self-reliance. I want to just read a little bit from major Transcendentalist works. Some of the most famous ones include Self-Reliance, written in 1841 by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And I'm just going to give you some simple quotations here. He says, for example, there is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide. What he's saying basically is that there is a time in every human being's education when we get to the point, to the conviction, when we realize that envy is ignorance and that imitation is suicide. Envy is ignorance, imitation is suicide. And what it means basically, that when we envy someone, that means that we are ignorant of our own capabilities. And by trying to imitate that someone, it's like we're committing spiritual suicide, because our own individuality, our own self, doesn't exist anymore because we're trying to imitate somebody else. We're trying to be the self of someone else, right? Whereas Transcendentalists believe that every person is unique and every person has a unique perspective on things. Some manage to find it, some manage to search themselves, their soul, and manage to challenge themselves to find that unique perspective, right? And to find that unique self inside every one of us, right? But some people are just lazy and don't put the work in. So they don't know who they really are, and they're just impressed by everyone around them, and they try to imitate everyone around them. So this is what Emerson is trying to say, that there is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide. Of course, he's the one who used to say, trust thyself. Trust thyself. Search yourself. Think. Contemplate. Find your voice, right? Find your unique perspective, right? Of course, it's a sentence, trust thyself, that goes all the way back to Socrates and the first philosophers of humanity. He also said, whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. Being a man means you have to be a nonconformist. You don't conform. You don't live with a herd mentality. You don't just follow people in a society just because you live there. You have to be convinced. If you have values, if you have ideas and ideals, you know, make sure you examine them and ask yourself whether you believe in them or not, whether you agree with them or not. I hate quotations. Tell me what you know, right? Stop telling me so-and-so says and so-and-so says and this book says and this book says. What do you say, right? Find your view, your voice, your idea. All life is an experiment. The more experiments you make, the better. He says also in the same book, Self-Reliance, speak what you think now in hard words, and tomorrow speak what tomorrow thinks in hard words again, though it contradicts everything you said today. So you shall be sure to be misunderstood. People will misunderstand you because yesterday you said something and today you said something else that contradict what you said the day before. But is it so bad then to be misunderstood? Right? Pythagoras was misunderstood, and Socrates, and Jesus, and Luther, and Copernicus, and Galileo, and Newton, and every pure and wise spirit that ever took flesh. To be great is to be misunderstood. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Self-Reliance, 1841. I want to read a little bit from Walden, or Life in the Woods, by Henry David Thoreau. This is another major text from the Transcendentalist movement. And the story behind this text is also interesting. On July 4th, 1845, Henry David Thoreau began his experiment in essential living, which means that for a few months he went to the forest and lived with the bare minimum, right? He lived simply, studying the natural world and seeking truth within himself. He went on land that was owned by Emerson near Concord, Massachusetts, and Thoreau built a small cabin there by a pond called Walden Pond. Hence the title of the book is Walden. And in this cabin, in this very basic cabin, Thoreau lived there for more than 2 years, living simply with the bare minimums. And all he did was write and study nature. So let's just take a few extracts from this amazing book. Thoreau says to have done anything just for money is to have been truly idle. Truly idle means you sit and do nothing, being lazy. So if you do things just for money, that means that you have been truly idle. You haven't done anything in your life if what you're trying to achieve is simply money. Because he says life has a lot more to offer than just money. Most of the luxuries and many of the so-called comforts of life are not only not indispensable. So most of the luxuries and the comforts of life, they're not, indispensable, right? They're not only not indispensable, and we don't need them. People make us think that we need the comforts and luxuries. He's saying not only we don't need them, they are positive hindrances to the elevation of mankind. They are obstacles in the way of the elevation of mankind. That means if mankind wants to achieve greatness, spiritual greatness, comforts and luxuries are an obstacle, right? We need to get rid of them. Rather than love, than money, than fame, give me truth. However mean your life is, meet it and live it. Do not shun it and call it hard names. It is not so bad as you are. Finally, I want to mention briefly Thoreau's famous essay, Civil Disobedience. This is his famous essay that influenced people like Martin Luther King and Gandhi and Cesar Chavez. This is an essay called Civil Disobedience. It's an essay in which Henry David Thoreau urges passive, non-violent resistance to government policies to which an individual is morally opposed. It was written after Thoreau spent a night in jail after refusing to pay a poll tax. He refused to pay the poll tax because he said the revenues, these taxes, the government is using them to allow slavery and to wage a war, an unjust war against Mexico. And he did not want his money, his tax money, to be used for either to maintain slavery or to wage unjust wars against other people like Mexico. So he refused to pay taxes, and he described this refusal to pay taxes as passive, non-violent resistance. Of course, he had to go to prison for that, and he did willingly. And when he came out, he wrote this essay, Civil Disobedience. It influenced individuals such as Gandhi, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Cesar Chavez. You will find some extracts from this in the PowerPoint presentation, and you can find the essay itself online. Henry David Thoreau's work is beautiful and deep and speaks to the heart and is powerful. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. I hope it triggers your curiosity to go and dig more into the life and work of the American Transcendentalist movement. Thank you for your attention, and see you in the next lecture. Bye-bye.